and welcome to the October membership meeting of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. My name is Steve Haleko. I'm the political director of the organization. And first thing I want to do tonight is kind of address the elephant in the room. I know some of you have the Guardians game on behind your computer, and I'm not going to ask you to admit it if you do, but I'm just going to offer two thoughts. I'm a diehard Guardians fan myself. I got my hoodie on, but I'm tuning out of the game completely. A, because we have a really, really great speaker, and B, because I think tuning out of it completely might change the luck for a phenomenal comeback. So I'm going to offer that as a possibility, but if you do have it on behind your computer and something good happens and you can't pay attention to the meeting, watch for your emails tomorrow, because we do record all of our meetings on our YouTube channel, and we're going to send you a link to the meeting and you can go back and see what you might have missed. The email that we're going to send tomorrow, we have found through numerous Zoom meetings that talking about other events and putting links in the chat is distracting when you're trying to pay attention to the meeting. So everything we talk about during the meeting, we're going to send you an email tomorrow with a link to all that we're going to talk about, especially the upcoming events I'm going to explain right now. Included in that email is an invitation to join the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. At all of our meetings, we have folks pop on who aren't members. Membership in our organization is free. You can be a subscribing member and get our emails and be a member. But if you're a sustaining member, you help us out by a $10 a year contribution. We do need small contributions to keep our office open. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staff. So if you could become a sustaining member, if you aren't already, or we'll put the donate link in. If you could make a small contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. Couple of upcoming CCPC events. This Thursday, we're continuing our visits, quote unquote, to the crisis pregnancy centers in Cuyahoga County. And I'm guessing everybody on this call is aware of what crisis pregnancy centers are, but just in case, they are really right-wing fundamentalist religious people who are pretending that they are licensed medical clinics, but what they're really doing is women that are pregnant, they're trying to talk them out of abortions. And one of the worst things about them is they're not private about the information they gather. So particularly, what's going on now since the repeal of Roe, they're very dangerous organizations. The second event is in Lakewood. It's on the corner of St. Charles and Detroit. It's kind of like the busy part of Lakewood, and we're going to be there during lunchtime, so we should get some good visibility. But we're going to meet down the street from the clinic at Bernice Pike Park in Lakewood, and then kind of walk up to the event, which will be right on Detroit. Now, don't worry. Like I said, we're going to send you an email, with all of this information. Our November membership meeting is going to be a recap of the midterm elections. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask the question, what happened? Why did it happen? Where do we go from here? We're going to give our analysis, but we want to make that event more interactive and hear from you guys as well. And hopefully we're going to have some pleasant conversations and not the unpleasant doom and gloom that some folks are predicting. Speaking of the midterms, I mentioned this at our September meeting. Democrats aren't facing the usual blowout situation that they have in midterms. There is a chance this time around. And unlike past midterm elections, what's really on the ballot is Trump, fascism, and abortion. And every candidate you see that has an R next to their name supports those things. Every candidate that you see with a D next to their name may not be perfect, but they're certainly better than what the R has to offer. The perfect example is Tim Ryan. Okay. Yeah, Tim Ryan has his faults from the progressive mind, but who would you rather have if Biden gets another Supreme Court justice? Him or Hillbilly Elegy? Who would you rather have if Lindsey Graham's bill to make abortion illegal nationwide? Would you rather have him voting or Hillbilly Elegy? And there are numerous examples on the ballot this fall as to why these midterms are so important. Now, we've been sending out, I hope you guys have been looking at this, volunteer opportunities to, and I'm looking around to see who's here. And I know a lot of you are doing a lot of work on the midterms, but please, pick something out and do something. The latest thing that's needed is poll watchers right now for early voting. And then the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party is looking for poll watchers at polling locations around the county. Speaking of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, one of our members, Dave Prock, is now the chair of the party. He wants to try to change the party and turn it into a progressive entity. He's only been in office since June. The first priority for Dave, and it actually leads into the second priority, making the party more progressive, is to get midterm turnout higher in Cuyahoga County. So the higher the turnout in Cuyahoga County, the better the media portrays, oh, a progressive is now the chair of the party. How is he going to act? Well, look what he did. He got turnout higher. So, I mean, there's a lot at stake in the midterm elections. Now, like I said at the outset, we have an outstanding speaker tonight. And I just want to say, Heather Booth, if there was an activist Hall of Fame, she would have been one of the first inductees. She's going to talk about the work she did in the 1960s with the Jane, the organization that helped folks get abortions safely before the Roe decision. And then she's going to lead up, to kind of what we can do now. But she's also been involved in civil rights, women's rights, numerous other causes. But before Heather comes on, I want to turn it over to Deb Klein, who's going to say a little bit more about Heather and do a more formal introduction.
Well, she doesn't want me to go on too long, so I won't, but we were talking about this ahead of time. I am going to share my screen so you all can see how I got to know Heather Booth. We were part of, at the time, the largest all-women civil disobedience action in Washington, D.C. I think it was in 2011 or 2012. We were sitting in front of one of the House office buildings and saying we weren't going to move until the House passed immigration reform. Well, we all know what happened with that. But I happened to spend the day in the lockup. They put us in the garage of the police station, seated between Heather Booth and Pramila Jayapal. So talk about I even just got goosebumps again. A power duo, one on each side of me, that I got to spend the entire day. And that's how I ended up really getting to know Heather back then. And she agreed to come and talk to us tonight about her experiences with Jane. And it's funny, this particular picture, I've had a couple friends get it framed for me and give it to me as a gift. And everybody wants to know, who's that woman in the background smiling? And I say, it's Heather Booth. There you go, Heather.
Deb, you are a fighter. You were a champion then, you're a champion now. Jobs with justice, political change, social change, organizing, doing it at the grassroots. I am so glad to be your movement partner. And Steve, I feel the same with you, to combine the issues and the politics and drive this forward. But I guess all of us on this call are dedicated to that. You are the people, particularly in Ohio, and I speak right now, I spent much of my life in Illinois, which is more of a blue state. I now live in Washington, D.C., which is, who knows what state it is in. Hopefully it will become a state. But we are putting our hopes on you, quite honestly, from around the country, that 2 more seats in the Senate, and we can codify Roe. The president has already said that this will be his #1 priority, that it will be the first piece of legislation he passes if we have 2 more seats in the Senate and hold the House. Now, we also have to do up and down the ballot, but it's why the entire country is looking to you and what you do now. And it's why, even though there was another event tonight that I was hoping to go to, I wanted to talk to people in Ohio who are making the difference, not only so that you do your own voting, get others to vote, but that you do the work. You're the people who do volunteer, who recruit others, who'll make the calls, who'll knock on the doors, who'll do the texts. And if we do that, we will win. Now, it's particularly important now because right now the country is on a knife's edge between the potential for greater freedom, reproductive freedom. In addition to codifying Roe, the next piece of legislation that would go through is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which already passed the House, but we need 2 more votes in the Senate, as you know, in order to overturn the filibuster rule, which now requires 2/3 of the Senate to vote. But if you overturn simply a rule, that can be done with just 50 votes, or 50 plus 1. And so we could codify Roe, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We could get assault weapons off the street. We could move further on climate. And we can make so many other changes we'd like to see. But really, part of the future is in your hands. On the other side of this knife edge, though, is an effort of the MAGA Republicans who want to push back on all of the progress we've had for the last 50 years. We haven't gone far enough. But they certainly want to, they've already undermined Roe v. Wade and undermined the most intimate freedom in a person's life, the decision of when or whether or with whom we have a child. They've already overturned that for now until we are able to win this election. They've said today there was an announcement that they want to basically undermine Social Security. I mean, it's almost, I can't believe it. This should be the third rail of politics. Undermining Social Security. They want to, this is by the Republican official Senate statement. They want to review every piece of legislation, every what they call entitlements really are earned benefits, every 5 years. And Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, who's also running for Senate, who is a senator now, bad one, he wants to review it every year. Can you imagine having to review Social Security every year? The mess we would end up with. They want to destroy Social Security. They want to take away the Inflation Reduction Act, which allowed us, after a 30-year struggle, to negotiate the prices of prescription drugs on Medicare. We've now got insulin will go for $35 a month. I just heard someone speaking who said he was paying over $600 a month for insulin. Now $35 will be the maximum. And for seniors, at me, I'll be 77 this year, we'll only pay a maximum of $2,000 out of pocket for prescription drugs. And also have the greatest investment in climate that has ever been made in this country's history. It all happened because we organized, and all of those are things the MAGA Republicans want to undermine, take away. And one thing about an election, when you tell people they're taking away freedoms you already have, that is a powerful message. It's a winning message. I see Michael Dover, he's nodding yes. He knows, you all know. And so we have the potential to win. Partly, the American public are on our side. Nearly 80% of this country believes that a politician should not come between a woman and her physician on making this most intimate decision of our lives about reproductive freedom. About almost 80% of the country is for banning assault weapons, not having them on the street. Why can't we pass it? Because we don't have those senators who represent us in the will of the American public. We have the American public on our side if we get out the vote. We certainly got it out during the presidential, but in a midterm election, often our folks don't vote. And those who do vote may not be as likely to be our folks because they're part of a political apparatus, often through evangelical and other churches, that are driven to the polls by this MAGA Republican conspiracy. And we do, by the way, know that it is a criminal conspiracy that wanted to overthrow this election because they knew they lost. So there are so many issues that have drawn public attention and have changed the dynamic that often happens in a midterm election, where often the party that's in power loses seats. But the Roe v. Wade decision electrified people and got our attention. Women particularly now are registering in much larger numbers than we've ever registered before. I just saw today their figures on what's happening in Georgia. Georgia has had a historic early vote turnout, just today's figures. We have to figure out exactly who's voting, but our people, if we organize, we will win. So the public is with us. The issues are with us. The contrast with the MAGA Republicans are with us. When you think about who their candidates are, they really have some whack jobs who are running. And we need to then move with the confidence to say, these are candidates who will, at a minimum, codify Roe, save Social Security, and save these issues in the Inflation Reduction Act, and to an extent, save and advance democracy itself. Now, I learned these lessons about what it means when you organize, about how we make change. I learned those lessons first when I was a young teenager. When I was about 13 or 14, I became active in the civil rights movement. Some of you I see are of my cohort, Larry Bressler, and some of you I don't see your faces, so Randy Cunningham, but I can see some of us are of the same age group in general. But when I was a young teenager, I became active in the civil rights movement. And in 1964, I ended up going to Mississippi with the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. Many of you may have heard about that project or known about it. Some of you may have been part of it. It's when Northern students were recruited to support courageous efforts in the South when it seemed hopeless. We now look at the civil rights movement. Oh no, they fought and then they won. It seemed hopeless. African Americans were being killed simply because they fought for the freedom to vote. And it was during that summer project that 3 of the young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, were killed at the hands of the Klan. The Northern students were brought down in part to shine a light on what was happening in Mississippi, but this was not at all certain what would happen. But within a year, we won a Voting Rights Act. And for 50 years, that has stayed as the law of the land because people organized. I went back to my campus in 1965, and a friend of mine told me his sister was pregnant and nearly suicidal. She was not ready to have a child and really wanted an abortion. Now, some of you of my era may remember, in 1965, we barely talked about sex with other people publicly, except in the privacy of a bedroom. We certainly, I don't recall talking about abortion. I didn't know very much about it, but I said, I'll try and help, not so much as a political act, but as a moral act. And many of our actions, what we do now, comes from our moral belief that we should have a society that treats others as we would want to be treated, that is kind and just, and building in what the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee we used to call the beloved community. So I went to the medical arm of the civil rights movement, not knowing really where to start, and said, did you know anyone who would provide an abortion? Now, this is at a time when 3 people talking about abortion was a conspiracy to commit a felony. I'm not sure I quite knew how illegal it was, but I knew it wasn't legal. And I found a remarkable doctor, Dr. T.R.M. Howard. There's a book about him called Black Maverick. I didn't know this at the time either, but he had been a courageous leader in the civil rights movement in Mississippi and came to Chicago when he stood up for the investigation of the murder of Emmett Till. There's now this new movie called Till about his murder in Mississippi. He said he'd perform the abortion, and I actually thought that would be it. I thought it was a one-off, a good deed. But word must have spread. I didn't discuss it with anyone. It was illegal. And someone else called. I made that arrangement, and word spread, and someone else called. And at that point, I realized I better set up a system. And because it was illegal, rather than saying, call Heather, we said, pregnant, don't want to be, call Jane. Over time, I lost track of Dr. Howard. It turns out he had been arrested for providing abortions. And I made contact with another doctor, with another provider whose name was Mike. We made an agreement that I had had also with Dr. Howard, how much it would cost. It had been $500. Could they do 2 for the price of 1, 3 for the price of 1, 4 for the price of 1? More and more people were coming through. Would they adjust the procedure? What goes on before, what goes on after? How do you counsel the women? And then more and more were coming, and I couldn't manage it on my own. And so I recruited other people into what we called the service. Now, this was at a time where people were dying from septic shock that they often got from infections, from having done harm to themselves because they so did not want a child at that point in their life, or because of something someone else did to them. Because when it's a for-profit system, the healthcare system, and it's illegal, people take advantage and victimize people. But Jane, we set up a system that wasn't for profit. It was the only thing that we provided, and so we knew how to do it. And we wanted to build a women's and caring community. Over time, Mike, it turned out, wasn't a doctor. And what we realized then is if Mike could do this, we could do this. And the women of Jane learned how to provide the procedures. And between 1965 and 1973, January 22nd, when Roe became the law of the land, the women of Jane performed themselves 11,000 abortions. Now, for years, we thought that that's the way things would be. But a right-wing MAGA faction has taken over this country, really in a criminal conspiracy. And it is up to us whether or not this precious freedom will be protected, as well as these other freedoms. It's not just a loan. It's about the freedom to vote. It's about the freedom to form unions. Right now, unions are more popular than ever. In fact, I was told they're more popular than hot dogs. Unions are at 71% popularity. Hot dogs are at 70% popularity. There are many changes we can make, but it all depends on what we do. And the key, it depends on whether or not we turn out the vote. And so I'm on this call really to thank you. We're going to open up for your comments, your questions, and however else you want to use the rest of the time shortly. But I'm really here to thank you for what you've been doing and tell you that in addition to those in Ohio, around the country, we turn to you and appreciate what you've done so far. In less than 3 weeks, we can change history. and move us on this knife's edge from tyranny into a direction to make for greater democracy. And sometimes it's the moment of greatest challenge that can yield the greatest progress when we organize. So thank you for what you've done. I look forward to engaging and hopefully celebrating our victories together.
So if you have a question, if you could either put it in the chat or raise your hand. And by raising your hand, I'm talking about using the reactions down on the bottom on your toolbar. Just hit the reactions. You'll see the feature to raise your hand because that moves you up to the top. And Heather, we already have our first question. I've been wondering why the current movement hasn't expressed a willingness to keep doing abortions, not only out of state, but also in state, out of sight.
Well, first of all, it is going on. Now, remember, Jane, no one knew about Jane until there was a book by a woman named Laura Kaplan, came out about 20 years ago. And then there's this movie called The Janes. The Janes. It's an HBO film. And there's another movie that's going to publicize it more. The movie's called Call Jane, and it has Sigourney Weaver in it. And I think it's Kate Moss. I think that's the right name. And that's coming out October 28th. And so Jane has become more well-known now, but for over 40 years, it wasn't well known. I wasn't discussing it with anyone. In fact, before I spoke to anyone, I wanted to know what was the statute of limitations. This was a conspiracy to commit a felony. In Texas, as you probably know, you can get $10,000 for reporting on someone else who's providing an abortion. It's like turning into a dictatorship, a foreign dictatorship, where there's a secret police who reports on your friend, your taxi driver, your mother. By the way, most of the people who get abortions already have children. They know what it means to have a child. So to Elisa's question, those systems are going on already. And many of them are going on with medicine abortions, because there are two pills that if you take them with a doctor's guidance or a knowledgeable provider's guidance, it can also provide an abortion. And those are, there are services going on like that all over. There was just an article I read in the New Yorker, in this week's New Yorker, you may want to look at, and you can get it online. That's about a group in Mexico dealing with those in Texas. I'm doing an event with people in Illinois who are providing, because it's a sanctuary state, providing services for people in nearby states, Wisconsin and other places where it's already been outlawed. It's been outlawed in 26 states. But we can make a difference. Codifying Roe will allow this to happen at the federal level, but the fight goes on also at the state level. So Elisa, thanks for your question. And I'm glad you saw that there was an older movie called Jane, an Abortion Story. Was there bounty hunting when Jane was active? Do you want to know, this is a question from Virginia. In some ways, the opposition has learned from us and has become more vehement and vicious. There wasn't a bounty system, not in the 60s and 70s. But more than that, what's happened is that this has become a partisan issue. It didn't used to be a partisan issue. But what happened is that the right wing of the Republican Party made a deal with the evangelical churches, a conscious deal that Paul Weyrich helped to negotiate as a right-wing strategist for the Republican Party. And the Republican Party said, They will provide political know-how to pass the issues that the evangelical churches and some of the Catholic churches wanted to provide on a religious doctrine of no marriage equality, no birth control, no same-sex relationships, funding private religious schools. That the right wing of the Republican Party, which didn't really care about those issues, the right wing of the Republican Party cared about not paying taxes for the wealthiest. They cared about not having environmental standards. But they made a deal that Paul Weyrich negotiated and others and said, we will give you the political know-how and funding if you give us the popular resource base and move your folks to the polls. And so this has become a partisan political issue that it was not before, with enormous funding in it. And so it's a very different arena than it was that Virginia's asking about in the 1960s and 70s.
So Heather, I got a question as a direct message that came in before the other one, so I'm gonna ask you that one. It's from Michael Dover. Many of us are in despair for so many recent reasons, or since the losses of Bernie nationally and Nina locally, have concluded that the reforms we've won are just band-aids, and that we can't win transformative reforms through change through the ballot box. What can you say to progressive and democratic socialist activists about how to balance electoral work with other mass movement and organizing? And how can we make a difference?
Well, I came into this work through grassroots organizing. It is the core belief. I think it is the people-to-people work that can make the difference. Initially, I actually wasn't for electoral work. I grew up in the old Mayor Daley, Chicago, who gave, the shoot to kill order for those who were protesting both after Dr. King's death and then protesting against the war in Vietnam. I didn't want to be part of that political operation. And then I worked in Mississippi, where Stennis and Eastland and people who were the senators were racist and murderous. I didn't want to be part of that political effort, but I learned the wrong lesson. I thought it meant I didn't want to be part of politics, but what it meant is I needed to build my own political base, not mine, but ours. And that when we have a political base that is built locally, that is deep, that goes on 24/7, 365, every day of the year, with ebbs and flows, then we can move that power into elections. A friend of mine, Alice Palmer, who was still living, a great African-American leader in Chicago, she told me, if you don't do elections, elections will do you. And after Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, and I saw what happened to the smashing of many of the labor unions, of a smashing of the hopes that many of us had, of the rising of racial inequality, I realized, yes, and Michael, just as you're asking in your question, we need to build our political base, and we need to move it into elections, and then we need to hold accountable after the elections. So it's a virtuous cycle, not a vicious one. In fact, I often say there are at least 4 M's we need to do. We need to do M's. We need members. We need to recruit people, real people. Yes, we can do it by social media, but door to door. One of the reasons why I'm more optimistic about this election is we can have door-to-door work. In the last election, we were following the science and said we shouldn't go door-to-door because of the risk of COVID. Well, there's still a risk, but we now know how to do door-to-door COVID safe. So we need to recruit people, do that door-to-door work. We need to spread the message, not just say, be for democracy, but talk about people's lives. How will your life be improved by what we do? That's why I mentioned we lower the cost of insulin to $35 a month. We've lowered the cost overall for what you pay out for prescription drugs. We're dealing with some portion of student debt. So there's ways to improve lives. So we have to spread that message. You'll also notice I talk about abortion as a freedom to make the most intimate decision of our lives, when, whether, and with whom we have a child. That's a way to talk about it that is now a proven way that's effective, as opposed to the right to choice, which many people felt was superficial and not serious enough as an issue. So members' message, money. We need to give money. We need to raise money. It is now, I said, it's a partisan fight that's very well funded. We need to do our share. And movement. We need to show up. And by coming on tonight, even those of you watching the baseball game, those of you rooting for the team, or those who aren't on because you're at the game or looking at it, you're the people who show up. You're the people who do the work. Michael, does that respond to your question? Did you have more you wanted to say about it? You know, I'd say even one more thought. There's a training center I started called Midwest Academy. You want to see about it, it's www.midwestacademy.com. I now mostly don't do the training, but I chair the board. There's a theory of change that it promotes based on many things, but there are three key principles based on our values. One is we want to improve lives. So the reforms we've got have to improve lives. What are the ways to improve lives? Those are the 4 M's, but elections are part of it. 2, we want to give people a sense of their power. So it's the organizing element. Even in elections, we involve people so they know they have the power. And 3, and this is the key element to your question, it's looking for non-reformist reforms, changes, reforms that by winning those reforms, it gives people confidence more change is possible and limits the power of those who have unaccountable power. The forced negotiation of the prescription drugs against these pharmaceutical companies, this has been a 30-year struggle or more. That is a structural change. They won't have the equal power they had. It's not everything, but we want Medicare for all. But it's a step, and it says, if you keep fighting, you can win. So, Michael, that's another part of ways to look at the question of how do you work in elections when you're getting reforms. It's not everything we want, but it's not just the abstraction. So someone is perfect. They're going to say, oh, I've got the perfect image of the society that I want to see. But you're not doing anything for real people.
So we do have more questions, Heather. How do I find out about these systems going on for surgical abortions? It seems like the Planned Parenthood type clinics are not keeping up the Jane spirit.
Well, first of all, Planned Parenthood is still the largest healthcare provider for women in America. You know, abortion was only, I think it was about 5% of all the work that they did even before, but they've had to close, I don't know, 100, 200 clinics. It's really, they've really taken a hit. But Planned Parenthood still will know about where there are providers. There are sanctuary states, Illinois is one of them, California, New York, where it's already been codified into law. There are groups around the country. There's a group called Sister Song, that is an African-American led group, particularly in the South, and a woman named Loretta Ross, who was one of the founders of Sister Song, just got a MacArthur Genius Award. Mm-hmm. So we knew she was a champion, but now we know she's also a genius. But there are other groups. There's a group called the National Federation of National Abortion Federation, NAF. And I think if you start following the thread, there's a group called Women on the Waves that have offshore boats that are providing this support. And then one of the groups is listed in this New Yorker article I mentioned before.
So another question is, as a group founder, how do I get more people to volunteer? That's from Carrie Schaff.
How do you, I'm somehow having trouble hearing. How do I get more people to volunteer?
As a group founder, how do I get more people to volunteer?
Well, when people don't want to volunteer and we say, well, they're apathetic, I want to tell you how the lesson I learned on this. When I was a young mother, I had 2 little kids at home. I had a meeting coming to my house that evening. I was working full time at another job. Someone called me on the phone and said, will you come and be part of a phone bank? And I said, I just can't do it. And the person on the phone, frustrated, said to me, oh, that's the problem with you people. You're too apathetic. And I realized something. Apathy, or people not doing what you want them to do, is because you're recruiting them to do what you want them to do. But if they recruited me to do what I wanted to do, I would do it. So you've got to find out what are their interests. Now, it may be their interest on an issue, reproductive choice, freedom to vote, climate, whatever the other issue is, but it may be other things. It may be they want recognition. They want to be a speaker at a press event. You put them on the meeting and they see their name on the meeting. And maybe they'll come because their name's on the agenda. Maybe they want training to know how to do it. Maybe they're frightened about how to do it. I wasn't involved often because I was too insecure. I didn't think I knew how to do this work. Can we support them? Do they think they'll find people who will be good partners for them? Is it social? Is there food? So part of organizing is figuring out the other person's interest. And then there are other tools and techniques, and it's one of the reasons why we have Midwest Academy to teach those skills. It's an important question. Whoever asked it, thank you. It's one of the most important questions in organizing.
So our next question, how did you cope with the gravity of what you were doing at the time? Or were you so passionate you just moved forward? Were you scared, and did anyone in your sphere, your family, discourage you from the work? And that's from Virginia Weiss.
Well, Virginia, I was scared I'm scared most of the time in most of what I do. Mostly, I think I don't really know enough. I don't know that I'll be good enough, not smart enough. Almost everything in the society tells us we're not enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not tall enough. You're not thin enough. You're not enough. And so we start to believe it. Even if we act with confidence, we really may think, some now call it imposter syndrome, but even beyond that, it's like feeling, I don't know what the hell to do. I was approaching this call and I was thinking, Ohio, my God, you just had a debate. I don't know enough. I don't know about the background. I'm trying to read about it. So many of us have that feeling. And part of what we need to do, part of the reason you've got this Cuyahoga group, is to build people's confidence and support and to say, maybe you can't do it alone, but together we can do it. We'll figure it out. In those days, I was frightened, not just of being arrested, but of, would I do it right? Would I risk women's lives? What would I do? By the way, if you see the movie, one of the things you'll find out is at the end of 1970, the year before Roe became the law, 1972, 7 of the women of Jane were arrested. By the way, the documentary is extraordinary because they found the policeman who led the arrests. He's on camera. I mean, the film is really an amazing documentary. I learned things that I never knew watching it. So 7 were arrested. I'll tell you what happened. I won't tell you what happened because you should see the movie. It's on HBO. It's not that much to see. And also there was concern about, there was care taken. So we had one place where people met and you could come with your friend, a partner, your children. And that was called the Front. And then there was a place, a rented apartment often, where the procedures were provided, often called the Place. And we had drivers back and forth. So we had a system set up. But yes, we were frightened, though I'd say one more thing about it. When I was in Mississippi, people would say to each other, "Are you willing to die for freedom?" And I very much wanted to live, but I was willing to take that risk. But I think now the issue is not, are you willing to die for freedom, but are you willing to live for freedom? Are you willing to do the work every day when it's too boring? Oh, I got to make another phone call. Oh, I got to get on another Zoom. Oh, I'm sick of it. You got to make do another. I've done GOTV. We have to do it again. I only find a few people who didn't know they weren't, that election day was today. But you found someone. It's, will you do the work every day? And if we all do the work every day, we are the majority and we will win.
And we have a follow-up question from Eliza Wiedenbaum. Doesn't it seem strange, to put it nicely, that the big clinics aren't just going underground?
That the big what? I'm sorry, there's some way I'm not keeping every word.
The big clinics, isn't it strange that the big clinics are not going underground?
Well, many of them are still above ground, but they're not providing abortions. So that in fact, in 26 states, services are limited. And the services in the sanctuary states are overrun. I spoke to someone in one state that said they used to get 50 people a day. They were now getting 150, and I bet the numbers are even increasing. And so they need to be supported. We don't know how much is underground, partly because it's underground. And Eliza said, they could be in Ohio. They could be. It's the nature of an underground. But we have to make sure that this is kept safe and legal and accessible. We should remember also that if you had money, if you had resources, if you had education, if you had connection, you often found a way to get an abortion. But if you didn't have money, if you were young, if you were unconnected, if you didn't have the educational resources to know where to go or who to contact, it's those people who ended up without the procedure, and those people who had a forced pregnancy. And we now even face, there may be a forced miscarriage. If you have a miscarriage, there are doctors frightened about providing the medical help you need because they're frightened of being attributed to having performed an abortion. By the way, that is one of the most effective arguments to make with people who are anti-women's freedom. If you say, well, look, if they're pregnant, they want this child, but they have a miscarriage, or they have a condition that means that it threatens their own life or the life of this child, this future fetus. The doctors can't even provide medical help in many of the states. And so that's one of the most effective arguments against the brutality of the opposition right now.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I encourage you to do the work, to sign up for shifts, particularly that final GOTV, but to spend time. How many volunteers can you get? Can each of you recruit 5 other people to work with on election day? They need election workers too, people who won't falsify the vote. They need people to spread the word. One of the things we expect is that candidates who know they lose from the MAGA Republicans are likely to say the election was stolen from them. We need a message out there. So we need members, message, money, movement, and we need you. I thank you all for what you've done and what you're about to do. I look forward to hearing how the work goes. I hope to celebrate our victories together.
Now, if we were live, I think we'd all stand up and give Heather a huge round of applause. We probably would have done it at the start too, but let's either go like this or click the chat to raise your hand, please. And thank you, Heather.
And give applause to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Thank you very much.
So speaking of like the charge to the midterms, final score, the Guardians lost. So I'm looking at it as kind of a plus, because more energy for the fight the last 3 weeks. It's kind of like if you're a lifelong Clevelander, you got to see what happens. But you know, let's wait till next year when we don't have midterm elections, and let's go for it this year. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you in November. Anything else, Deb?
No, just let's get out there and do the work we have to do. Oh, join us on Thursday in Lakewood and stay tuned for the next action outside Birthright in Parma Heights.
Yeah, we actually, we don't announce one until after another one is done, because, you know, the bad guys are going to kind of figure out that we're doing this pretty soon. And so Thursday, Lakewood, please. And I see some Lakewood folks on the call. It's not too far away from you. So thank you. Good night.